North Korea says it conducted a strategic cruise missile launch on Thursday, a move widely seen as a retaliation against its hard Washington tabletop drills on Wednesday local time. 1 year on in Ukraine, ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of the country, the UN General Assembly adopted a peace resolution calling on Russian forces to immediately withdraw from Ukrainian territory. Washington may limit South Korea's production of chips in China in its latest efforts to stop advanced technology from flowing into Beijing. Good morning. North Korea says it fired 4 cruise missiles into the East Sea in the early hours of Thursday, in an apparent response to Seoul and Washington's joint drills to deter the regime's nuclear and missile provocations. According to the North state-run Korean Central News Agency, the North Korean Army's Eastern Division's Strategic Cruise Missile Unit held an exercise where it launched 4 Hwasal-2 projectiles from Hamgyeongbuk-do province. It says the 4 cruise missiles hit their target in the East Sea by flying elliptical and figure-of-8 trajectories for over 170 minutes, simulating a distance of 2,000 kilometers. The drill seems to have coincided with South Korea and the U.S. tabletop drills held in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday local time. Today, February 24th, marks the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ahead of the somber occasion, the UN General Assembly adopted a symbolic resolution calling for peace in the region. Our Sinsebyok has more.
On the eve of the first anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war, the UN General Assembly on Thursday voted overwhelmingly to approve a resolution calling for an end to Russian aggression against Ukraine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 141. Against, 7. Abstentions, 32. Draft resolution A/ES11/L7 is adopted.
Among those voting against were Belarus, Russia, and North Korea. Most of the abstentions came from Africa and Central Asia, including China and India. The non-binding resolution endorses Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, rejecting any Russian claims to parts of the country occupied by Moscow. The UN also demanded the immediate, complete, and unconditional withdrawal of Russian military forces. With no end to the war in sight, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned China of consequences if Beijing provided material support for Moscow.
Any Chinese military support for Russia in this conflict, or for that matter, the systematic evasion of sanctions, would be a serious problem for the relationship between the United States and China.
NATO also voiced concerns, saying the history of war would only repeat if Beijing gives any support to Moscow.
This is part of a pattern, Georgia 2008, Donbas, Crimea 2014, and then the full-fledged invasion last year. We need to ensure that we break the cycle of Russian aggression.
There was no immediate comment from China. But Beijing's foreign ministry said early Thursday that any potential intelligence regarding such support was just speculation. Meanwhile, in a joint press conference with the Spanish Prime Minister Thursday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he has yet to see the peace plan promised by China. Beijing promised to publish its political solution to the Ukraine conflict this week in time for the 1-year anniversary of the war. Zelensky, however, said it is a good sign that China started talking about Ukraine and that he would like to meet with Beijing about the proposal before assessing it. 신세벽, Arirang News.
1 year on, but the war in Ukraine shows no sign of abating. The conflict has taken more than a nation's territory. Its economic and humanitarian ramifications have been felt all around the world. Our Moon Hae-ryun looks back at the past 1 year.
I decided to conduct a special military operation. It aims to protect people who have been bullied and subjected to genocide by the Kyiv regime for 8 years.
February 24th, 2022. With these words, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a full military offensive to overthrow the Ukrainian government headed by President Volodymyr Zelensky. Western countries and their leaders responded immediately with a wave of economic sanctions and condemnation.
There is absolutely no evidence that Ukraine posed a threat to Russia that would justify Ukraine's invasion. And that is why the United Nations General Assembly also regarded the invasion of Ukraine by Russia as unlawful under international law.
However, Russian forces marched on and took control of regions bordering Russia and along the coastline. The action was met by Ukrainian resistance, aided by Western-supplied weapons. Ukraine retook much of the northeastern Kharkiv region, damaged the Kerch Strait Bridge, a crucial supply route linking Crimea with Russia, and pushed Russian troops away from the city of Kherson. But the Kremlin declared the annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions: Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. While little territorial gains were made, the war has had a devastating impact on people's lives. The war claimed the lives of an estimated 40,000 civilians and resulted in 8 million refugees across Europe alone, making it the fastest-growing refugee crisis since the Second World War. Russian attacks have resulted in at least $350 billion worth of property damage. Despite the brutal humanitarian and economic impacts the war has had, it looks as though negotiations to bring an end to the war are unlikely to happen anytime soon.
Both sides they would only be interested in sitting at a negotiating table if they have some advantages from participating in negotiations, or if they believe that they are in a position to make concessions.
In the meantime, Ukraine has stepped up its bid for military aid, including fighter jets, and further economic sanctions on Russia from the international community, not just its Western allies.
So I think a long-term perspective of any foreign government is to provide Ukrainian government with as much assistance, in particular military assistance, to help its defend war effort.
A year into the war, Kyiv remains standing, but whether it can continue to do so is in the hands of more than just Ukraine and Russia. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
South Korea and Poland have agreed on strengthening their defense ties, pledging further military exchanges and industry cooperation. Now, that's according to Seoul's Defense Ministry Lee Jong-sub after his high-level meeting with his Polish counterpart Mariusz Błaszczak. The two officials held talks on Thursday during his trip to Warsaw, agreeing to conduct joint military exercises and strengthen technological cooperation in order to bolster their defense capabilities. Warsaw says it has ordered F-50 fighter jets from Seoul, with Polish pilots already undergoing training in South Korea. The ministers also expressed their mutual support for Ukraine, and Poland said it would actively back Seoul's efforts for peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. One year has passed since the crisis in Ukraine began. How has the war lasted this long, and how and when can it come to an end? For more, let's turn to Professor Ronald J. Sunny from the University of Michigan. Welcome to the program.
Happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So the war has reached the 1 year mark, but what factors were behind it going on for so long? I mean, was it the support from the West to Ukraine or Ukraine's ability to withstand brutal attacks from Russia? What do you think?
I think both of the reasons you gave are the correct ones. The Russians launched the attack on February 24th of last year, and they thought they could quickly decapitate the Ukrainian state, maybe kill or capture President Zelensky. All of that failed. And it failed, one, because the West united around the United States in the NATO alliance, supplied weapons to Ukraine, and more than anything else, the morale, the motivation of the Ukrainians themselves to defend their homeland ultimately stopped the Russian onslaught. The Russians actually thought they were going to enter Kiev quickly. They had dress uniforms, policemen. They thought they were going to occupy the country. All of those aims failed. And now, instead of a quick, short blitzkrieg war, we have what we call a war of attrition that's going on and on and on.
Right, and now Putin is saying that Russia will focus on boosting its nuclear forces. I mean, what's behind this threat from Putin? How likely is it that Moscow will actually go ahead with nuclear activities and like a possible nuclear test?
Vladimir Putin has made many kind of saber-rattling comments about nuclear weapons. If you actually listen to his speeches, he's also made it fairly clear that ultimately he was not going to use those weapons. And Western intelligence seems to indicate from satellites no movement of tactical or long-range nuclear weapons from their original bases or stockpiles. So I don't think there's any interest on the part of the Russians at this time to use such weapons. But we should be clear. Russia and Putin himself cannot afford to lose the war. It would probably mean his own removal from power. There are far more militant and vicious people nearby who are ready to take power. And so he needs some kind of victory, some kind of, let's say, limited achievement in the war in order finally to think about sitting down to negotiate with the Ukrainians. But I would say that right now we're far from negotiations. Neither side is interested. They both think that ultimately they have to fight it out on the battlefield right now and see where they stand in a month or two.
Right. And the Ukraine has come a long way, and some watchers forecast that the war will be long. How long do you think the war will last? What do you think needs to be done to bring the crisis to an end? More weapons or peace talks with Russia? What is it?
I wish I could give an optimistic answer to that question. No one can predict how long the war will go on, but it seems to me that right now we're at a stage where a battle on the field is what's going to determine the length and who succeeds in this war. I think the Russians, there seems to be indication, are about to launch a major offensive. The Ukrainians might strike back in the south, and we'll have to see where those movements end up. I wish that both sides were more willing to compromise, but it's hard to compromise, particularly for the Ukrainians. What are they going to give up? Part of their territory, part of their homeland, concede to an aggressive war and attack, which has no meaning, no reason from Putin's Russia? It's very hard to think about how this is going to end up.
Right. And the war itself isn't just between the two governments. The war has left millions of people in need of humanitarian aid in Ukraine. And I hear over 8 million people have become refugees. What do you think people affected by the war need the most at the moment?
Yes, this is the largest refugee crisis on the continent of Europe in our own times. And people need refuge, of course. They need homes. They need some kind of work. They need protection, health care, all of the things that displaced and refugee people need. And note, it's not only Ukrainians, but hundreds of thousands of Russians. Some of my own friends have left the country because they don't want to participate in this war of aggression.
Right. It's devastating to hear that so many people just had no choice but leave their homes.
It's really terrible. This is an unnecessary tragedy. War itself, of course, is always a failure, right? It's a sign of human failure, a failure to negotiate, a failure to compromise, a failure to come to some kind of agreement. But it's very hard to compromise when what each side wants to achieve is considered and conceived as an indivisible good, something you can't give away, namely, in this case, the homeland. And
Right.
both Russia and Ukraine are claiming the same territory as part of their homeland. And how are you going to divide that? Now, by all international standards, international law, the areas which Russia has attacked and occupied, including Crimea, is Ukrainian territory, even
Right.
though many people there are Russian or Russian-speaking. So it's very hard to compromise and give away. It'd be like giving up your right arm or your right leg.
Right. All right, Professor, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Always my pleasure.
A senior U.S. government official has revealed that the U.S. may place technology limits on semiconductors that South Korean companies produce in China. Washington is once again trying to keep Beijing in check by preventing advanced technology from flowing into the country. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
South Korean chip makers Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix may not be able to produce semiconductors beyond a certain level of technology in their factories in China in the near future. Speaking at a forum hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security Alan Estevez said Thursday that Washington will likely limit the level of advanced semiconductors produced by South Korean companies in China. The move is part of Washington's plans to prevent advanced technology from getting into the wrong hands. However, Estevez says the U.S. is also working closely with South Korean companies to help minimize the potential damage to their businesses in China. This comes as Washington announced export control measures for companies producing semiconductors in China last October, while allowing a one-year grace period for Samsung and SK Hynix factories in China. However, in October this year, when the grace period ends, it will likely restrict semiconductor production in China. While the South Korean government and the Korean companies will demand another extension of the semiconductor export control moratorium, pundits say the latest remarks from the U.S. official indicate that the two major chip makers will not receive a further exemption from the measures. Estevez argued in favor of strict measures against the production of such technology in China, saying that in a world where technology is the driver of military power, cutting-edge critical technologies such as semiconductors are central. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korean actor Yoo Ah-in tested positive for propofol after undergoing a drug test as part of a police probe into his alleged illegal use of the anesthetic medication. According to police officials on Thursday, the 37-year-old actor tested positive after police sent his hair and urine samples to the National Forensic Services for tests. His hair sample tested positive for propofol, while his urine samples was positive for marijuana. Yoon has been under police investigation after a Ministry of Food and Drug Safety report alleged that the South Korean actor has been buying propofol for non-medical purposes since 2021. For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley joining us here in the studio. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Dami.
Let's start with an update on the disgraced movie producer Harvey Weinstein. He's been given an additional prison sentence.
Well, that's right, Dami. Harvey Weinstein was handed an extra 16 years in prison by a Los Angeles court on Thursday local time. Now, this after jurors convicted the 70-year-old on 3 counts of rape and sexual assault against a single victim. Weinstein is already serving a 23-year prison sentence handed down from a New York court in 2020. Now, on the same day, jailed R&B singer R. Kelly was also handed a longer prison sentence. A Chicago federal court sentenced him to 20 years on charges of child pornography and enticement of a minor. Now, 19 of those 20 years will be served concurrently, effectively meaning he will spend 1 extra year behind bars, on top of the 30 years he was already serving for racketeering and sex trafficking charges. Moving on to China now, where rescue efforts are underway following the collapse of a mine in Inner Mongolia. According to local authorities on Thursday, at least 6 people have been killed, another 6 injured, and over 40 are still missing. Now, state media says the incident occurred on Wednesday local time when a 180-meter tall open-pit coal mine wall collapsed on top of miners. 900 rescue workers have been dispatched, but search efforts were initially hampered by an additional landslide. Chinese authorities have since launched an investigation into the cause of the incident, and some people have reportedly been detained. The mine is run by the Inner Mongolia Xinjiang coal industry, which was fined last year over several safety violations. Meanwhile, the European Commission has banned TikTok on its employees' devices. The organization made the ban official on Thursday, saying that the short video social media platform poses cybersecurity threats. The ban covers official devices handed to staff and personal devices too, if they have work-related applications installed. Employees have been given until March 15th to remove TikTok. The move marks the first time that the EU has barred its employees from using an app. The ban comes as TikTok has faced increasing scrutiny over allegations that it collects users' private data for use by the Chinese government. But TikTok says that the ban is based on a misconception of the app and has denied sharing information with Chinese officials. And finally, supermarkets in the United Kingdom have begun rationing fruit and vegetables. Some of the country's largest stores are restricting the sale of items such as tomatoes, cucumbers and lettuce to as little as 2 packs per person. The UK government says the shortages may last as long as a month, with the Rural Affairs Minister suggesting that Britons eat more seasonal foods instead, suggesting turnips. The produce shortfall comes as UK consumers are already facing increasing grocery prices and a cost of living crisis. The shortfall has been blamed by the government on bad farming weather in Spain and Morocco. But others say that it is due to post-Brexit trade issues and surging energy costs.
Good morning. Warmer than average temperatures stick around on this last Friday of the month. Morning temperatures are about 5 degrees higher than the same time yesterday. But it's the very unpleasant dust covering most parts of Korea, so please have a face mask that can filter fine dust today. Also, visibility has dropped due to a mix of fog and dust. Then better airflow will help to push away the dust in the air from the capital region. Meanwhile, east of Gangwon-do province is forecast to receive heavy snowfall into tomorrow, with up to 15 centimeters of heavy snowfall expected, so please be well prepared for that. Afternoon temperatures will go up similar to slightly lower than yesterday, so topping out at 8 degrees Celsius, Daegu, Gyeongju at 13 degrees this afternoon. While skies will be bright, but sky lines could be blurred with that fine dust. Other than east of Gangwon-do province, the rest of the country will be under sunny skies this weekend, but turning colder briefly in the mornings. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back next week for a Monday's edition at the same time. Happy Friday.